Good morning and welcome to the third annual PSU EnvironMentors Symposium. My name is Professor Greg Jenkins. I'm co-director of the PSU EnvironMentors chapter, and I'd like to again thank you for joining us this morning. Once again, we've managed through another year with the pandemic and pretty much having a virtual year of research for the EnvironMentors. We are honored this year to have 16 EnvironMentors, and today you'll hear our presentations from 14 student projects. Now, none of this would be possible without the support of the PSU community, which includes the families, the parents, of course, the high school students, the PSU undergrad mentors, the PSU research mentors, and the EnvironMentors team of Ms. Lorraine Taylor, of course, Muriel, or 12 projects, Muriel, Mitch Spear from Harrisburg, and co-directors Dr. Chris Boggs and Dr. Kathy Schaefer from Shenango campus. Now, next year, we have even greater aspirations for the program with more students from the various chapters, and with the hope that we will transition to in-person research. A special shout out to the graduating high school seniors. We hope that we have enhanced your high school experience through this program, and a special shout out to the graduating Penn State seniors, some of who are graduating this weekend. We wish all of you the best, and remember that you are a big reason for the success of our program. And you will be moving into the EnvironMentors Alumni League at this point, so we'll be coming back to you over time. We hope that you will stay in touch with us as you continue through your career, and we hope that you will make us proud in all of your accomplishments. If you're a high school senior and you're coming to Penn State next year, please consider becoming a mentor in our program. So with that, we have a wonderful program ahead of us. So let's get this John started. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jenkins. It's my very privileged to be able to introduce each of our young talented minds, and I'd like to get this started with our first presentation, Allison Mee from State College Area High School. Allison, you have the floor.
Hi everyone, my name is Allison Mee. I'm a junior at State College Area High School, and for this research project, I worked with Dr. Tanya Furman to examine the volcanic systems in Iceland. So there are 15 million years of volcanism in Iceland, but what exactly makes Iceland special? There's a mantle plume underneath Iceland, and in the picture on the right, we can see that there's the mid-ocean ridge, which is formed by two rift zones that are still spreading today, with the north propagating to the south. This scene that we studied specifically for our research project was the Berðabunga volcanic system, which is the largest in Iceland, producing the largest lava flows on Earth. And by examining the plagioclase feldspar and the minerals, we can use that to determine magma underneath volcanic systems and infer both crystallization and residence times. Our study area was in the propagating rift. So in the picture on the right, we see that this was the area in the black box on the previous slide. And so the lavas are flowing from the coast. So following that line of fissures, we are seeing that the samples we are working with came from the southern coast. And the samples traveled a relatively long way to get there, and they are relatively large in size. So the Bear-the-Bunga system is indicated by the B on the top right of the image, and that's where the lavas are originally from. Next, we have a map of Tungnarhraun, and this is just us being at that southern coast, which is roughly 30 to 35 kilometers from the volcano. So in section A, we have a map of the Tungnarhraun lava flows with the different samples that we examined in this study circled in red. And then on the bottom in part B, we have a map of the sample locations for this study. And circled in yellow, I have sample THF, which is a sample that we'll be examining a little bit more closely in depth. Our project goal was to determine eruptive timescales because the crystal sizes allow us to infer the residence times, which is just how long the magma travels within the crust. And pictured on the right is the recent Fagradal's Iceland eruption, which we'll hit on a little bit later for implications. Determining crystal populations. We can determine crystal populations by using thin section scans, and for this research project, we specifically examined 5 samples. So here is the plane polarized light image of sample THF3b, and this is just the normal way we look at rock samples. So to prepare the sample, it is basically just a very thin section of rock. A slice of rock roughly 30 microns thick, and it's just glued to a glass slide. So the image in total is about 5 centimeters, but enlarged on the slide. And so what appears to be that grayish color is the volcanic glass and the little crystals. And what looks like to be sort of like that background on the glass slide is the plagioclase feldspar and the vesicles, with the vesicles just being air bubbles. So the next 2 images show image processing to get to the data. Here we have the cross-polarized light image of sample THF3b. And so, back 2 slides. Yep, thank you. So basically, the light passes through some of the minerals, but not others, which causes an interference. And in this image, we see some big crystals and some little ones. For example, the arrow on the top right is pointing at a pretty small crystal, but then we have the arrow underneath plagioclase feldspar, which is pointing at a relatively big crystal in size. So we see that there's a lot of differences within the sizes of the crystal and even the shape, such as a more of a square size versus an elongated size. And here is the final mask of sample THF3b. So this is the same sample image, except we're seeing that this is the mask that we created in Fiji. It was basically, the process for that was just thresholding, converting to a mask, analyzing particles, and painting out unwanted crystals. Crystal size distribution analysis. With crystals growing, we know that roughly little crystals grow a little bit more rapidly, while bigger crystals grow for a longer period of time. So by looking at the length, the lava before it turns into rock, we can determine the eruptive timescales for both. We took the CSD profiles of the rock samples, so that was using the crystal size distribution method to gain insight into magnetic processes, residence times, and future eruptions of the studied volcano. In the picture on the right, we have the major and minor axis of an enlarged crystal, and we see that on the top left, there's also another crystal, very small in size, just showing that we're taking the average of the crystal sizes, and there's quite a large difference between larger crystals and smaller crystals. here we have the THF3B best shape curve, which was just for the sample THF3B. And then here we have the slope lines from the CSD plots. So on the y-axis, we have the number of crystals, and on the x-axis, we have the size of the crystals. So we see that for the red line, which has a steeper slope, there are smaller crystals, and it seems that they have a smaller residence time. So we calculated the intercept and slope from a linear regression of the population density using the below calculations. And we found 2 episodes of magma storage. So that was indicated by the red line and the purple line. Our calculation yielded roughly 32 years for the red line and roughly 500 years for the purple line. So what this means is that the smaller crystals were in the lava for a shorter period of time than the larger crystals, which had a longer residence time. So they were staying in there for a little bit longer and they were growing in size. So implications. Berthabunga is the largest global eruption. We have a picture on the bottom left, and that was of Fagradal's, which was a different volcano that erupted quite recently. It was March 19th in Iceland. And so it was a relatively small eruption, and we actually found a similar timescale to the one we found in our research. So it was roughly 800 to 900 years for Fagradal's, and from our calculations, we yielded a little over 500 years, so there were some similarities there. And lastly, acknowledgements. I just wanted to give a huge shout out to all these amazing people that have helped me out throughout this research project. So Dr. Furman, Colin, Oliver, Eveline, Muriel, and EnvironMentors, the program. I am so grateful for this opportunity, and thank you all so much.
Excellent presentation, Allison. Way to get us started. We are going to be able to take questions. We have probably about 3 minutes for questions. Anything that we don't address, please use your question and answer feature of the Zoom presentation, and we'll get to those at the end of the presentations, but we do have time for a few questions for Allison. Anybody want to type any questions in? Okay, if you think of anything later, go ahead and type it in the Q&A. Otherwise, we're going to move on to our next presentation. Our next presentation's by Tori Shadende from State College Area High School. Go ahead, you have the floor, Tori.
Tori, are you here? Okay, hold on a second.
While we're waiting for Tori, I did get one question. If we're able to answer that, it says, what is the accuracy of the technique?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So for the technique, I would say it was relatively accurate, but of course there were a lot of steps involved where there could have been, like miscalculations or overestimates involved. Like when we were making the mask, we would base it off of the black areas, like in that final mask, and there could be other minerals that we didn't, or unwanted crystals that we didn't quite paint out, and that would have an effect on the overall calculations. But since we did examine the total percent vesicles over the total area, it wouldn't make too much of a significant impact. And also we did compare with some other data as well. So that was definitely great knowing that I could, like compare my answers with what I got with some of Dr. Furman's research students. But yeah, thanks for the question.
Thank you so much.
Tori, can you hear us now? Can you talk?
Yeah, I can talk now.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Okay, let's go.
Okay. So my project was focusing on looking at hydrogen sulfide emissions in the Permian Basin, specifically in an area called Hobbs, Texas. So hydrogen sulfide is a naturally occurring gas that occurs in crude petroleum and natural gas production, the largest source being petroleum refineries. So that figure on the right is just going over the process by which hydrogen sulfide is removed from gas during oil production. And high concentrations can corrode pipes, which could be a concern for the pipes, but there are also other health concerns. If you advance the slide. So the health effects are a concern because at low concentrations, it causes mild irritation like burning eyes and coughing. Moderate, it gets a little more serious with eye irritation and fluid in the lungs, but at high concentrations, it can cause really serious symptoms and even death, like tremors and convulsions. So this is just a table of some personal experiences from people who had exposure to hydrogen sulfide, and it varies from acute exposures to ongoing lower level exposures. And we can see that a lot of them were afterwards struggling with chemical encephalopathy, which is a neurological disorder related to exposure to a chemical. So it's definitely something that we don't want to have a lot of in the atmosphere. So Hobbs Tower in Texas is a monitoring facility that this year was gathering data on the levels of hydrogen sulfide in the air. And if you see off to the right, which is the east of Hobbs Tower, that is a patch of oil wells, and oil wells do emit some hydrogen sulfide. And if you advance the slide one more time, this zooms out a little, and Hobbs is now in red. So the area to the right is that patch of oil wells that I showed in the last slide. And then if you look farther away to the west, that's a much larger area with more higher emitting oil wells. So Hobbs is surrounded by a lot of these oil wells, and we wanted to look to see what the effects on the concentration of hydrogen sulfide would be. And the oil wells to the west, although farther away, a lot of them are more high emitting wells. The ones in black are the most high emitting wells. So we only have those in the west, and there's a lot of them. So we're wondering where would be the largest source of the hydrogen sulfide. So the first thing that we did was take the raw data from hydrogen sulfide concentration and look throughout the year to see how it was changing. And we noticed a clear pattern. That should say March 2020 to February 2021, but we saw a rise in the overall levels and in the peaks of hydrogen sulfide throughout the end of 2021 or throughout the end of 2020. And it seems like it may be coming back down a bit in 2021 beginning months. So we wanted to investigate what's causing the overall elevation of concentration and the higher spikes, whether this was an annual pattern, and whether we also want to consider if these could pose a human health hazard because there's a town, Hobbs, that is very close to these oil wells. So one possible meteorological factor that could contribute to this pattern is boundary layer depth. The boundary layer is just the layer of the atmosphere, the lowest layer that is in contact with the Earth's surface, and changes in temperature can affect this boundary layer. And so typically when we have colder temperatures, you have a lower boundary layer and higher concentrations. This is data that's showing boundary layer fluctuations from January to June 2020. And although we don't have that data for the whole time period of our hydrogen sulfide data collection, we do see a lot of fluctuation, and that does suggest that this could be a factor that is contributing to the pattern. So we wanted to look at other factors that might contribute and looked first at wind speed. So this is a wind rose, and it shows the direction from which wind was coming how often wind was coming from that direction, and then the speed. You see the scale on the right, the reds, oranges, yellows, those are higher wind speeds. We first looked at, if you could advance the slide, we wanted to see if there was a correlation between wind speed and hydrogen sulfide concentration, because that could give us some insight into whether the source was far or near. And we actually saw a negative correlation, a weak but negative correlation between wind speed and hydrogen sulfide. But at the higher levels of concentration, we did see a slightly stronger correlation. And having no strong correlation from wind speed suggests that the source might be a closer source because it would be present regardless of the wind speed. But we can't say for sure whether these would be significant correlation coefficients, because having so much data, even though they're very small correlation coefficients, there's a possibility that they could be significant. So that would take some more further investigation. So since the wind itself didn't give us too much information, we moved on to looking at a pollution rose, which is a similar concept as the wind rose, but instead of having wind speed represented by the colors, it now represents pollution. So here the warmer colors are representing the areas of high pollution. So we can see that a lot of our highest emission is coming from the east. So that is the location of the smaller or the lower producing oil wells to the east, and suggests that a lot of our measurements of hydrogen sulfide, could be the source of where we're getting them. And so this slide and the next slide are just looking at the monthly pollution roses. So we could see, if you can move the slide one more, there's a consistent pattern of having these higher concentrations from the east. So we thought that was consistent with the geography of the region because those wells are so close that they would have a large effect. But one thing that this might suggest is that possibly the wells to the east might be having like more leakage of hydrogen sulfide, because even though there's many fewer of them and they're lower producing wells, they are still contributing to the bulk of our high concentrations. We also looked at time of day to see if that had an effect on concentration, and found that the highest peaks occurred during nighttime hours. And that also, the boundary layer that I was talking about earlier with annual changes is also related to pollutant concentration over the day. So you do expect a similar thing with colder times to get higher concentrations. So that was what we saw here, and it's unclear whether other factors were contributing to this pattern throughout the day, but that is probably a major one. So the last thing that we wanted to look at was whether wind direction had an effect, because if we saw that there was a different pattern in the changes from, say, like the east winds and the west winds, we could say that maybe there's some event that happened from a source to the east or the west that changed the pollution rate throughout the year. But when we looked at the data, we actually found that there was a similar level of increase throughout the year. If you look at the scale on the bottom, the east winds, it shows that there are slightly higher concentrations, as we saw earlier, coming from the east. But we saw a similar pattern of increase, which suggests that it's not localized to one set of oil wells. And that would be evidence pointing to maybe it being more meteorological phenomenon, because it's not just one source that is changing in the level of emission or the level of hydrogen sulfide concentration. And we did move on to looking at the standard deviation, also to try and see if we could tell a bit more about the distance of the sources, just to maybe distinguish between the eastern and western wells. But that base level, that's about 1.5 parts per billion, may just be noise from the detection device. So then we moved on to looking at the ratio of standard deviation. But again, we found that there was similar results from eastern and western winds. So we concluded that most of our data has led us to conclude that there is an overall increase, not just a localized increase that is causing these changes. Although there would be more investigation needed to determine the cause of those high spikes. So we would suggest field observations to inspect equipment and look for leaks, especially in the eastern wells, and also looking at the residents of Hobbs and seeing if any of them are having negative effects to the hydrogen sulfide, because it was getting up to levels that could be cause for concern. So further study would be needed on the health effects, but the change should be monitored in future years to see if the pattern continues. So this is references, and I just wanted to thank my undergraduate mentor, Mary Ajibalade, my graduate mentor, Vanessa Montero, and our Penn State professor mentor, Dr. Natasha Miles, and also everybody at EnvironMentors. Thank you.
Excellent presentation, Tori. We probably have time for one or two quick questions. And I do see one. What are the meteorological conditions associated with convection atmospheric boundary layer depths of almost 1,500 meters? Or, I'm sorry, that's 3,500 meters.
I'm not sure with the specific number there, but the general meteorological conditions that I learned about were that when you have higher concentrations, that would lead to a higher boundary layer and more diffuse pollution. But then when you have a lower boundary layer, it would sort of like pack the pollutant in more concentrated. So that was when we were seeing the higher levels.
Excellent. Thank you. Any other questions? Oh yeah, here. Are the wells running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week? And did they run at a constant rate during COVID-19 pandemic?
I'm not sure if they were running 24 hours a day. What we were focusing on was more overall emission throughout the year, changes throughout annually. But we would be concerned with any of the spikes that we'd seeing, even if we're saying, oh, it's only running at this time, so that's why we're seeing these high levels. What we normally see is no hydrogen sulfide at all in the atmosphere. So any of these levels are a cause for investigation.
Okay, thank you. We can take probably one more. Can hydrogen sulfide cause forest fire? And since hydrogen sulfide smells terrible, it should be easy to detect, right?
Hydrogen sulfide can be detected just by smelling it. I know that talking with our mentors from last year, they did actually find a leak by smelling it, going there and being able to smell it. This is remote work, so they would need to be there in person to to see if that was like a way that we could find if there was a major leak coming. And I'm not sure about the forest fire specifically, but I can look into that if somebody had a question about it.
Thank you. We'll move on. Our next presentation is from Middletown Area High School, Tuanik Coriola. Tuanik, you have the floor.
Yeah, hello, thank you. My greetings to everyone. My name is Devanik Koirala. I'm a junior at Middletown Area High School. I was under mentorship of Dr. Ola Raswan and Ms. Amna Javed. Our research was on photovoltaic solar cells, specifically with perovskite materials. So the outline, so we learned many things throughout this journey, and we learned from the beginning what the photovoltaics was and how to measure the solar cells efficiency, which were defined by the solar cells parameters like current and voltage, and what were the most common photovoltaic materials used. And next slide, please. So photovoltaics is the process of converting sunlight directly into electricity using solar cells. It is backed by the photoelectric effect. Its physics is backed by the photoelectric effect, and And a solar cell is an electronic device that is made out of semiconductor materials, optimizing them, making it able to directly convert sunlight into electricity. Next slide, please. So how it operates is like whenever the solar cell, which are optimized semiconductors, when they are struck with sunlight, there are generation of light generated carriers, or also known as electron hole pairs. And then the collection of those carriers are then brought back to the front and rear contact, which you could see on the picture on the left. And then this results in the large voltage across the solar cell contacts. Then the load could use the generated electricity, and thus the electricity is produced. So the rear contact and the front contact are provided with the carriers through the process of diffusion, which is facilitated by p-n junction, which is created in the semiconductor as a result of the unification of p and n junction, which are created by the doping of the semiconductor materials, and which create the diffusion due to the imbalance in the concentration of electron hole pair. So the carrier and the electron hole pair are generated due to the band gap energy being broken by the energy from the sun. Whenever the photons strike the semiconductor, the band gap energy, if it has been met, the electrons are broken, and as we know, electron hole pair is created after fulfilling band gap for semiconductor. Layers of solar cell and their functions. So solar cells are basically made up of two main layers and one additional layer, which are like contact layers. Are medium. They are conductors made out of conductors, and they are layers which acts as a medium between load and generated current. And the semiconductor layer, or p-n junctions, these are the main layer of a photovoltaic cell. These absorbs the energy from the sun and use it as a source for generation of current and voltage for desired applications. And on top of all of it, there are anti-reflection coatings, which are for prevention of reflection of sunlight. These are accomplished using lenses and other light capturing devices. So the most common photovoltaic material in use in present is silicon, and it is due to their accessibility and high efficiency, and they also provide a greater lifetime. There is much more knowledge of silicon available due to more research being done on it. So, and there are also other materials such as copper, next slide, please. Such as copper, indium, gallium, is CIGS. These are thin film technologies with promising solar cells efficiency because of its favorable electronic and optical properties. These have direct band gaps and a high absorption, and as they are thin film technologies, their fabrications are much easier and they are much more transparent. So CDTs are also the thin film technologies. They have a high throughput, which means the amount of material or items passing through a system or process. These give much more transparencies to the sunlight, and thus they are very high absorbers. So this was our specifically researched material. It's perovskites. So perovskites are not been commercialized yet, but these materials are allows very much fine tuning of the solar semiconductor material, because it lets us to change its composition and thus respond to different colors in the solar spectrum. And besides perovskite, there are also other materials which are not much commercialized. They are organic or carbon-rich compounds. This kind of solar cell are best to provide a more abundant and less costly photovoltaic material, and has the ability to be applied to flexible substrates, permits a wide variety of use because they are more flexible due to their structure. So these are the solar cell parameters which allows us to calculate the efficiencies of how much efficient any solar cells are. So in that there are open circuit voltage, which is a maximum voltage at zero current. This is when the diffusion occurs on the both end due to the PN junctions, and there is no current flow current at the present. The VOC is the open circuit voltage. And previous slide, please. And there is ISC, the short circuit voltage, which is the measure of maximum current at 0 voltage, and the MPP, which is the maximum power point. This point and the VOC and ISC collectively give us the efficiency of solar cell, which is determined as the fraction of initial power, which is converted to electricity, and is defined as shown in the picture of the equation 1 here. So next slide, please. So thank you everyone for being with me. I would like to specifically thank my mentors for helping me learn these concepts of photovoltaics, and Penn State University for this wonderful opportunity, and EnvironMentor for helping with all my problems, and hope I created some takeaways for you all through these posters. Thank you.
Thank you. Electrifying presentation. We do have time for a question. It says, currently, what is the efficiency of using solar panels for energy generation?
Solar panel efficiencies are calculated by efficiency. Like every materials have its own efficiency, which are open circuit, which are calculated collectively by open circuit voltage and the closed circuit voltage, and with the initial power, fraction of initial power. So that is the efficiency of using solar panels.
One other question. What are the advantages and disadvantages of the perovskites, and how do they compare to traditional solar cell materials?
So perovskites are those materials which are they are composition of different materials, and they have unique structure. Like we have been researching about a mesoporous perovskite, which has unique structure of, they have mesoporous, which means tiny. There is hole-like structure in this in the perovskite structure, so which allows more tuning of the composition of for like tuning band gaps. And its disadvantage is there is not much more research about perovskite, and they are not been.
Thank you. One other question. What do you think that the organic what do you think that the organic materials for photovoltaic cells is the way moving forward?
Organic material, you said?
Yes, organic materials. Do you think that that's the way moving forward for photovoltaic cells?
Organic materials give us much more flexibilities for developing a photovoltaic panel or photovoltaic cells, which surely helps for creating a small kind of devices and very flexible kind of solar materials. So that could be very helpful for making a small and flexible materials. Surely it is a very good material.
Thank you, Duanik. Next, we're going to be moving on to our next presentation. We have Julian Kim from State College Area High School. Julian?
Well, actually, we have Ty back, so we will have
Okay.
Ty presenting next. Okay, Ty, if you're ready. Ty?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay, perfect. Let's go.
All right, so this is my project that I worked on with Dr. Tut and Julpa, and it's a simulation of a suborbital rocket pre-flight pumping system using Raspberry Pi. This was done thanks to the Penn State Rocket Lab in collaboration with NASA. Next slide. So first off, I should talk about what a suborbital rocket is. And so unlike the rockets you see like in the SpaceX launches going to the moon and stuff, a suborbital rocket does not go into orbit. All of its energy is directed normal to the Earth, which gets it out of the atmosphere, but not tangential energy to like the Earth to actually get it some velocity into orbit around the Earth. Next slide. So this is actually a map of the entire of the observable universe, and it's an X-ray map. So you can see the northern. Can you go back? So you can see the northern spur, SEO-X1, and the system that we're going to be studying is the Cygnus loop, and we'll be studying it with X-ray with a process called X-ray spectroscopy. Next slide. So a little bit about X-ray spectroscopy. If you can think of it kind of like when you pass white light through a prism and it kind of splits up into a rainbow, kind of using similar principles there. Basically, we use a device that splits our X-ray into different wavelengths, and then we can graph the different intensities of the X-ray on our graph with another sensor. And so this is inside the rocket. This is what the sensor looks like and how it's like packed into the rocket. You can see it in the back. That's like that focuses the X-rays. And then our CMOS imager is all the way to the kind of like to the right over here. And that's what actually collects that data. Next slide. So this is the X-ray grating mounting wafer. And so that's what diffracts our X-rays into the different wavelengths. And then on the left, you have the CMOS sensor. And that's what gets us our data. And the nice thing about the CMOS sensors, they're very low cost relatively, and they're very accurate. Only one problem with them is they have to work at a very low temperature, actually minus 80 degrees Celsius. So that causes some problems for us. First off, that means that the chamber that in the rocket where the sensor is kept has to be at minus 80 degrees Celsius. And then it also means that there can't be any moisture inside that chamber, because then that water would turn into ice and it would freeze on our sensor, which would mess up our readings, and it could also damage some of our electronics. So this is how we solved that problem. Back one slide. I think another slide. So we use something called pre-flight pumping. And that's basically before our rocket takes off, we cool our chamber down, and then we also use a vacuum to take all the air and all that moisture out. Next slide. Now for pre-flight pumping, you could do this possibly by, like holding the rocket down and holding like a hose of liquid nitrogen to it and a vacuum to it. But rockets tend to be very dangerous when they're armed and about to take off. So it's best not to have humans there. Next slide. So we decided that we could automate this system. So this is the GUI that we built. And you can see it has a diagram of the process of the pre-flight pumping system. So first, in the GUI, the rocket engineer will press turn on roughing pump. And the roughing pump, what that will do is it will get the pressure inside the chamber from 1 atmosphere down to 10 to the -5 torr. But that's still not enough for our sensor. So then the rocket engineer will open the solenoid latch, and I'll open up the chamber for the turbo pump to start working. And the turbo pump will take it from that 10 to the negative to the -2 torr down to 10 to the -5. And that will actually be enough for our sensor to start working and not get damaged from the ice. And then also some other features of our GUI, you can see that there's 4 pressure gauges to track the pressure of the process. There's kind of like a box that guides the user through. And then there's also something to keep track of the temperature. There's also an automatic mode that takes the rocket engineer out of the equation. They just have to press a button and it will do the entire process for them. Next.
Hello, Ty, can you hear us? Hello. Okay. I think he may be having some internet connection issues, so let's just wait for a couple minutes and we'll get back to him.
Hello?
Hello, can you hear us?
Hello? Can you hear? Can you hear?
Yes, I can hear you now. Okay, Ty.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Okay.
Still waiting for. Okay. So as I was saying, this is basically, since we don't have a rocket, I can't bring an entire rocket into my room. This is the breadboard that I set up to kind of mimic that those electronics in that process. So in the middle, that dial thing is a potentiometer, and it's to mimic the changes in pressure throughout the process. So it'll give us like analog values to work with. And then there's 4 LEDs, and that's the roughing pump, the solenoid, the gate valve, and the turbo pump. And so that's like a circuit that I can use to kind of test my GUI and see if it's working. Next slide. So this is like a video. Can you play that?
Hold on a second.
Should have sent it to you.
Yes, hold on a second.
Yeah, so as you can see, as I press buttons, it will turn on the LEDs on the breadboard. The GUI also has a feature where it won't let a button be pressed if it's not ready, like if it's not in the next step of the process. And it also has a feedback loop where it checks the pressure to make sure that it's okay to press the button. And then also, like I said, if you press the automatic mode button, it will just do the entire process automatically. Next slide.
Okay. Perfect.
So some of the next steps, more detailed implementation. So possibly making this more automatic. So maybe that the system can communicate with the systems in the rocket itself. Also checking the temperature, maybe checking, sudden drops or increases in pressure that will, notify the system to, or anything weird that will, notify the system to like shut down everything or make whatever changes it needs to be made. And then also like developing the GPIO interface to work with like real rocket hardware, not just like the little like $5 circuit I put together like in my room. And then, it could maybe look a little more prettier, more simpler to work with the rocket engineers. Next slide. How much time do we have?
You have 1 or 2 minutes.
Yeah, so I can show this then. Let's go. Okay, next slide. Okay, so that's the end of my thing. Just wanted to give a quick thank you to Dr. Tut and Julpa, my mentors, and of course, Muriel for helping organize this program. Thanks. Any questions?
Thank you, Ty. Do we have any questions for Ty? Okay. What type of sensor did you use to record the temperature using the Raspberry Pi?
So we didn't actually have a sensor for recording the temperature. The thing in the GUI was just like a placeholder for when that more implemented development in those next stages.
Okay, thank you. So now we are moving on to Julian Kim from State College Area High School.
Hello, my name is Julian Kim, and I'm currently a junior at State High. I was matched with Nikolai Sartori and Dr. Joshua Robinson as part of the EnvironMentors program, and our project was focused around the use of 2D materials and gas sensors. would be understood by an elementary schooler. We wanted to create a STEM research opportunity for young students to encourage future involvement in STEM. However, it's difficult to simplify the abstract nature of 2D materials. We aimed to explain 2D gas sensors with fun foods, similar to the work that Dr. Robinson had done on his Mission Materials Science website. We created a model sensor with Jello and explored ways of integrating intentional defects to create a better sensor. Here's a video detailing what the experiment looked like. Did you know that material scientists can design and build very thin materials that are only 1 to a few atoms thick? These materials have special properties because they are so thin. In this mission, you'll use fun foods to build a model of a 2D material to explore some of the same features that scientists observe in microscopes. Then, your challenge will be to use what you've learned to design, build, and test a brand new material for a particular task. So get ready to think like material scientists. For this experiment, you will need Jello powder, a cup of hot water, rice, some cereal, about 30 peas, a cup of milk, honey, 5 plates, and a bottle cap. First, you want to prepare the Jello according to packet instructions. I mix the Jello powder with 1 cup of hot water, making sure to completely dissolve the powder. Carefully pour a thin layer of the Jello mixture onto each of the plates and try to prevent air bubbles from forming. You can save the rest for more experiments or for eating. On your first plate of Jello, sprinkle in a small handful of rice. These will represent your small defects on your 2D surface. On your second plate, sprinkle in large pieces of cereal. These will represent large defects. Leave the last 3 plates untouched for now. Take all 5 plates and lay them flat in your refrigerator and leave them there for about an hour or until solidified. Once your Jello has been chilled, take one of your 3 smooth plates of Jello and carve out lines across the plate with the flat end of a toothpick. These will represent defects called grain boundaries. These boundaries occur because materials are often grown from different locations at the same time, causing a border when the different sections come together. With one of your smooth plates of Jello, hold it at an angle and trickle a small stream of milk down the Jello. Our milk will serve as a model for how electrons flow along our 2D surface. For this step, I recommend pouring the milk from a cup with a spout and holding the plate of Jello above a sink or another container to prevent it from getting everywhere. Record your observations. Repeat this step for the plates with rice, cereal, and carved lines, and record your observations as you go. What do you notice? How do the different types of defects affect the flow of milk? Could we manipulate the defects to purposefully change the surface properties of the material? Although some defects appear naturally, scientists do strategically place defects on the 2D surface to better suit it for specific application. In this experiment, we will be attempting to create a material specialized for a carbon dioxide sensor. 2D air sensors work by applying a voltage to the material and using defects called linkers. These linkers grab onto CO2 molecules, causing them to stay on the surface longer than other passing air molecules. This will cause a small change in the voltage, which scientists can then use to calculate the amount of carbon dioxide present. For this next part, take your last smooth plate of Jello and dig out 4 holes with your bottle cap. The placement of these 4 holes is entirely up to you. Fill the holes with honey to make the surface sticky. These will represent the linkers. Next, tilt the plate and roll peas down the Jello, similar to how you did with the milk. The peas represent the carbon dioxide molecules passing by the sensor. If you have trouble getting the peas to roll down the Jello, mixing the peas with oil helps them to roll. Record your observations. How many peas were you able to get stuck in the holes? Try repeating this step with different arrangement of holes. Which one captured the most amount of peas? Congratulations, you just thought like a material scientist. In this experiment, we learned that scientists are able to use 2D materials in unique applications because of their special properties. We found that having different defects can impact the behavior of the 2D material, and we can manipulate them to best fit our needs. Much like how we added rice, cereal, lines, and honey holes to our Jello, Scientists add and remove different kinds of atoms from the overall material and add boundaries to alter surface properties. These have allowed us to make more accurate measurements and have a wide variety of applications, from health to electronics to the environment. Before we got to this final version of the experiment, we obviously ran into a few challenges. The first one was realized quite quickly, and it was the fact that Nikolai and I had no idea what 2D materials even were. It was definitely a learning process, and we had to understand what was even going on before we could create a module teaching it to others. For the first few meetings, we listened to Dr. Robinson give explanations of how 2D materials worked and went over some academic journals that detailed the applications. The next challenge we ran into was that we had to take PhD research and explain it to elementary school students. Yeah, it's about as hard as it sounds. When Dr. Robinson did a test run with his kids, we found that they didn't understand what electricity was. We had to work around gaps in their knowledge by making it intuitive, which was very difficult. If taking physics this year has taught me anything, is that science is often non-intuitive. Another obstacle we had to overcome was that models can't perfectly replicate real-life scenarios. We explored different ingredients and different meanings for each. Originally represented the electron flow with milk, but switched to peas to represent the quantization of energy, before switching back to milk to prioritize the flow of electrons. We ended up making the peas represent gas molecules that stick on the jello surface instead. We also switched the large defects from raisins to cranberries to cereal to emphasize the effects the large defects had on the surface. Finally, we had to make this whole experiment fun because it was a STEM outreach. We wanted to develop a material design challenge that would encourage kids to think critically and test hypotheses that were still relevant to gas sensors. And it took a lot of brainstorming to come up with ideas that would be fun to children. However, after months of work and deliberation, we were able to create a final module that met all of our objectives and sufficiently taught the basics of material science. I'd like to thank Nikolai Sartori for being a wonderful, reliable mentor and being someone I could talk to about my plans for the future. I'd also like to thank Dr. Joshua Robinson for taking the time out of his busy schedule to teach Nikolai and I about the fascinating world of material science. Thank you for listening.
Very informative, Julian. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, we have a question here. Great experiment. For real 2D sensors, are there kinds of defects your illustration? I'm sorry, let me repeat that. For real 2D sensors, are the kinds of defects that you illustrated common, and how can they be controlled? Julian, are you muted?
Sorry, Julian couldn't be here today.
Okay.
So he had a video, but any questions that you have for him, please forward to us and we'll email to him so he can provide you with the answers. So yeah.
Okay. Our next presentations from Gianna Caputo from Hickory High.
Hello. So my name is Gianna Caputo. I am a senior attending Hickory High School, and I plan to go to Penn State University to major in forensic science. Throughout this presentation, I worked with my undergraduate mentor, Catherine McKinney, who is majoring in mechanical engineering at Penn State Shenango. I also worked with my faculty mentor, Dr. Matthew Caputo, who did a wonderful job of explaining this whole process to someone who doesn't really know about it. So today I will be talking about the surface texture analysis of polylactic acid. For our overview today, I will be explaining the objective of the presentation, our importance of surface quality, what is 3D printing and more in depth about it, what is PLA and why we chose it, our printing parameters that we used, our statistical analysis, following with our surface roughness tester, and ending with our scanning electron microscope. Next slide, please. Our objective was to identify a set of printing parameters that will produce a controlled surface texture with a uniform morphology and low roughness. As you can see, these two samples have a different texture. The one on the left is more rough and gritty, opposed to the one on the right, which is more smooth and controlled. Next slide. So what is additive manufacturing or 3D printing? For our experiment, we chose fused deposition modeling in the style gyroid simply because it uses the lesser amount of filament. There are 7 different types of 3D printing, but like I said, we chose fused deposition modeling because it's also inexpensive and it's the more common form of 3D printing. In this picture below, you can kind of see how the process would be. What happens is the nozzle will heat, melting the filament, and then the nozzle will move to whatever you coated it to move to, and it will lay the thin layers of filament, creating your sample. Next slide. So during this experiment, we chose polylactic acid as our filament, and this is just a biodegradable polymer. It could be used in many different ways, such as engineering, design, consumer products, manufacturing, education, aerospace, and medical, etc. For an example of engineer, we have on the bottom right-hand side a wind turbine, and on the top right-hand side, you have a medical screw. Now, this is biodegradable and biocompatible, and it starts to degrade within 30 weeks inside the body. Next slide, please. So why would you want a smooth surface on your 3D printed sample? Well, the texture affects how the printed object interacts with its environment, and it can change the performance and durability. A rougher surface will experience a large amount of friction, which can lead to degradation beginning on the surface. This can lead to failure of your 3D printed parts. For example, if someone were to need a 3D printed ear as shown here, you want it very rough or gritty in case it gets caught on someone's hair or a t-shirt. You would want that sample to look as human as possible. Next slide. So here, to create your 3D printed samples, you would need your printing parameters, starting with your infill percent, and that is just your percent value of support material used within the printed object, following with your layer thickness, which is just the height or the thickness of your filament layers that were laid to make your surface. The next would be the speed layer of deposition, and this is just the speed at which the nozzle extrudes the filament. Next, you have your nozzle temperature, which is the temperature at which your filament is melted at for deposition. And lastly, we have your on and off feature of ironing, and this is simply just a final layer with additional filament to create the smoothest surface. Next slide, please. Our printing parameters that we used, you see on the slide. So we kind of made a chart to follow. So 0 being minimum, 1 being middle, and 2 being maximum. And then A, B, C, and D correspond with A being speed of deposition, B, nozzle temperature, C, layer thickness, and D, infill percent. And what we did during this project is we made 10 millimeter by 10 millimeter with a height of 5 millimeters, just like you see in the image below. On the next slide, you'll see how these numbers correspond with the chart. Next slide. So during this experiment, we used functional factorial design statistical analysis, and this is just a process that we use to test our samples. And we created 27 samples just to make sure that we had the best range to test your surface roughness. Next slide. So to begin your testing surface roughness, you would use a surface roughness tester. And this is just a device that uses a probe to record the change in the surface displacement of a sample. In the bottom left-hand side, you can see the equation that the machine uses to test your surface roughness. And this is the middle picture is the machine that we use to test the surface roughness. Next slide, please. These are our results that we concluded. If you scan through, you can see that number 8 or run 8 came in with the lowest of 0.8206. And if you see again, one of our rougher samples that we tested was run 6 with 1.7608. Next slide, please. So your next step would be your scanning electron microscope, or your CEM. And this is just a device that allows a detailed image and magnification observations of your sample or object. The picture all the way to your left is the CEM. What you do is you put your sample inside the microscope. A beam will come through the microscope bouncing off your sample, which shows pictures on your connected computer. Next slide, please. So how you control the computer is with a keyboard. You can control the focus, the zoom, brighten your picture, just to make sure you have the smoothest aspect of your sample. Next slide, please. So this is what you would see on that connected computer. This is run 6. The middle pictures here are the top surface. You can see it's semi-smooth, but a couple runs and ridges you can see just from a backup view. But if you go into more zoom, as you can see on the left-hand side, there's a lot of ridges, clumps, extra filament laid onto the top. And in the top right-hand side, you can see the corner of sample 6. There's a crater or a hole, you can say, in the corner. It just shows how truly rough the surface can get. Next slide, please. As you can see here, our best sample was run 8. And the top pictures along the top-hand side of the slide, you can see how smooth the sample looks. It looks very uniform, but you can definitely tell that there are some runs. But this sample was actually so smooth that we got to see our scratch from our surface roughness probe along the surface. So that truly showed how smooth the sample truly was. Next slide. So based on the printed and tested and analyzed, we were able to conclude that the parameters for run 8 showed to produce the smoothest average surface roughness of 0.8206 micrometers. And in comparison, again, the picture on the left is run 6 and the picture on the right is run 8. I would like to thank all my mentors, my undergraduate mentors, and Dr. Matthew Caputo for teaching me everything I could learn about 3D printing. Thank you.
Awesome. We're doing great on time. Do we have any questions for Ms. Caputo? What were the differences in parameters between rough and smooth printing?
So you can see a difference in those numbers just based on the percent infill. So if there was more, filament that was used and it was more messy, then you would have different parameters for those. But on the smoother ones, you can definitely see the difference because of the filament that was layered.
Great. One other question we have here. Did you do all your testing at Shenango?
Yes, once the COVID regulations were lifted, we were able to get into the lab just for a little bit with, 6 feet apart and all of the COVID regulations that were allowed.
Very cool. Thank you. Oh, we do have another one. What types of materials are typically used with 3D printing? Plastics? Question mark.
Yes, I believe we only worked with polylactic acid, but I believe it's just different type of plastics, but I will look into it.
Do you expect a difference in material strength between the smoothest and the roughest samples?
I am not too sure, but I will also look into that.
Dr. Caputo says they're investigating this soon. Thank you. All right, that does it for this morning's sessions.
right, next we have Miss Lauren, our graduate assistant. She's gonna take time to honor our graduate students that are graduating this academic year. So Miss Lauren, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Oh, I think I'm echoing. Turn this phone off. Good afternoon. It is a pleasure and complete honor to honor our graduates that are graduating, environmental graduates that are graduating this semester. It has been a complete pleasure to work with each and every one of you. And I am so happy, and we could not be any more proud of the accomplishments that you have made and the impact that you're going to make in our society. So without further ado, I want to thank and congratulate the graduates, undergraduates. First, we have Brittany Wooten. Brittany is graduating with a degree in meteorology and atmospheric science with a minor in geography. Her research interest includes intersection of climate change, extreme weather, and human health. She will be pursuing her PhD at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Next, we have Nikolai Sator. Nikolai will be graduating a degree in biochemistry and molecular biology. He is interested in working with plants and genetics within the biotechnology industry. Evelyn Tarts is graduating with a degree in life science. She has a passion for medicine and will be pursuing her medical school after graduation.
Miss Lauren, are you here? Okay, I'm gonna fill in for Miss Lauren. Next, we will honor our high school students that will be graduating this summer, starting with Chidere Oputa. Chidere will be graduating from State College High in June and will be moving on, starting her undergrad academic year at Cornell University, and she will be pursuing another graduate degree in biomedical engineering. Next, we have Victoria Tori Shodende, who will be graduating also from State College High June this summer, and will be attending Yale University in the fall, starting the fall, and will be pursuing a molecular biology major at Yale. Next, we have Gary Zhang, who also will be graduating.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Sorry.
Okay, no worries.
Garrett Zhang is graduating, and he will be pursuing his degree in biochemistry, molecular biology at the Pennsylvania State University.
And next we have
Todd is graduating from State High, and he will be pursuing a degree at Massachusetts Institution of Technology in mechanical engineering with a concentration on robotics. JoJo is she's graduated from State High Area School District, and she will be attending the Pennsylvania State University, and her major will be health policy administration with a focus on the pre-medicine track.
Perfect. That is all we have for our morning session. We're gonna take a short 5 minutes break, and we will get back together at 11:30 with session 2 of the presentation. So five minutes break, 11:25, 11:30, between that time. So thank you guys for joining us so far. We will be back in 5 minutes. Thank you. And we are back from the break, and we will begin with session 2 of the presentations. Mitch, the floor is yours once again.
All right. I hope everybody was as impressed as I was in the first session. We're going to continue in the second session with our next presentation from Lily Umbel from State College Area High School. Lily?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Hi, I'm Lily Umbel. I'm a junior at State College Area High School. And on my research project, I worked with Monica Vesky and my Penn State professor mentor, Dr. Rachel Brennan. And we worked on helping create the Water Energy Food Nexus Discovery Dashboard database. Next. So to provide some context on what the Water Energy Food Nexus is, here's a picture of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. These were created in 2015, and there are 17 goals that outline just aims for sustainable development in the future. And you can see that 3 of them directly involve water, energy, and food. The second one, zero hunger. The 6th one, clean water and sanitation. And the 7th one, affordable and clean energy. Next. So the Water Energy Food Nexus provides us with a way we can examine the complex interconnectedness of water, energy, and food resources and the implications for sustainability and environmental protection, especially within the context of a growing global population, increasing demands for these resources, and urbanization. And these resources require an integrated approach so that we can have security in the resources and, as I already said, sustainable development. Next. So the Water Energy Food Nexus is a model through which researchers, corporations, and policymakers are structuring their work. So it's important to have resources to access existing projects and information on the Water Energy Food Nexus. And there are existing resources right now to find projects, such as the Nexus Knowledge Hub. However, our Discovery Dashboard improves upon these previous resources by geographically organizing projects in a user-friendly interactive visual map format that has a lot of different filters so that you can find specific projects. Next. So for our methods, we used Microsoft Scholar and the Nexus Knowledge Hub to find relevant, interesting projects. And then we gathered a lot of information on the geographic region of the projects, the land class, what type of project they were, whether it was something policy-based, something that was more implementation or research, the institutions involved, the local collaborators, the contact info. We created tags for each project, and we identified what user group would be most interested in the project, whether it would be policymakers or industry workers or academia. And then we also decided what category each project was, whether it involved water, energy, food, or a combination of those. And then we entered this information into a spreadsheet. And then this third step was completed by another PSU student we worked with, Matthew Arenas, and he would add the projects to the dashboard via a CSV file that was uploaded to an ArcGIS online platform, and the data was able to create the map that exists on the dashboard. Next. So we have a video to just kind of like overview the website. So
this is going to be a demonstration of the WEF Nexus Discovery Map, which is the website that we helped work on. So you can see the map is in the center here, and to the left we just have a description of the project, and then we have some categories you can filter by. So if you were looking at the projects here, you can filter them by emerging technology, implementation, policy guide, and whenever I select one of these filters, you can see it applied to the map here. And over here on the right, you can see how many projects there are with that selected filter. And you can also scroll through just all of the titles of the projects here. And then on the left, there's also a place where you can filter by water, energy, and food. So if you wanted to look at projects that are solely involving water, or maybe that are with water and energy, or you could even look at projects that involve all 3. And then at the top here, we have a place where you can filter by region. As you can see in the map, we have projects from all over the world in here. And so if you wanted to look at just projects in Australia or projects in Europe or South America. You can look at a lot of different filters. And then we also have an area where you can filter by land class. So if I wanted to look at projects that were in the coastal land class, I could. And then we have a legend over here for the different icons. And whenever I click on one of these icons, it will show me the information for that project. So it has the project title, it has the location, the point of contact in the email, it has the institution, any local collaborators, a link to the project, and the year and category. So this is the project discovery map. And then we also have this WEF index map, and these colors are based off of a numerical index of how well a country is doing with respect to a certain resource. So this is for water. And then I could also change it if I wanted, using this filter up here, I could see the energy index. And then we have a third one that combines all of these, which is the project discovery and the WEF index map. And this is really cool because it shows where projects are located, but also where the resources are lacking. And so this can be a really helpful tool for people to see, like, where should more research or technologies be focused so that we can best target sustainability and development issues. And then the final thing here is just a legend, and it kind of just walks you through how to use the map as a tool. And we also have a place where you can submit more projects, because the work that Monica and I did was we just helped to fill this up with projects so that I could start. And we currently have 100 projects in the database, but we hope to add a lot more. And that is the map. This is going to be.
On these slides, we just have some examples of different projects if you were curious, like what kind of projects were in the discovery map. So the first one is an example of a more technology-based project. So structuring an integrated water energy food nexus assessment of local wind energy desalination system for irrigation. And then we also have some case studies in different regions. So this one is looking at eucalyptus plantations in Ethiopia next. And then this project is examining intensive agricultural in central Italy from a WEF lens. And we also have projects that look at more urban areas, like looking at smart cities next. So this chart right here was made by the other Penn State student we worked with, Matthew Arenas, and this shows the percent distributions of the different projects we have and what region they're based in. And as I already said, the dashboard has a large diversity of projects from different regions and land classes, which makes it really helpful for people to find different things. Next. So for the implications of our project, the completed discovery dashboard can be used as a tool to connect researchers, policymakers, and industry workers who are working in similar geographic regions. And it can also be used as for someone like who's a researcher or policymaker if they want to find a project that was successful that's similar to a project they're starting. So if they're working on a project in a specific land class or a specific region and they want to find other projects that are similar and have been successful, they can use the map to do so. It can also be used as a tool for educators. And I touched on this in the demonstration video, but the geographical significance of it is that it can allow us to look for inequities in certain regions. If there's a region with like a low WEF index, but we see that there's not a lot of research going on there, we can try to focus more research efforts there or allocate more resources. Next. So I would like to thank my Penn State professor mentor, Dr. Rachel Brennan, my Penn State undergrad mentor, Monica Vasky, the other Penn State student who worked on this project with us, Matthew Arenas, and also just the EnvironMentor program, Muriel, Miss Lorraine, and Dr. Jenkins, and everyone else who provided us with this great opportunity.
Excellent presentation, Lily. Does anybody have any questions for her? Excellent. For the WEF Nexus Discovery Map, it's fantastic in all the ways you described. What is the source data for the water, energy, and food indices that were also mapped?
So yeah, that's actually on the Discovery dashboard. If you go to the section where it provides like how to use the map, we actually used a website called the wefnexusindex.org, which provides numerical indexes for water, energy, and food. And that's the resource we used for that.
Okay. How easy is it to update the database, and how often do you think it'll be updated?
It's really easy to update just because it's just like entering information into the spreadsheet, which is then, like I already described the process, how it's then added to the map. So it's really easy to update. And I don't know how often it will be updated, but we really want to get more projects. This was kind of just getting it started and up and running, but we hope to add more projects to it, certainly.
Great. We have one other question. It says, what does the energy index show? Energy production? What kind of energy production?
That's a great question. I'm actually not sure what specifically the energy index is showing, but if you went to the website where we got the index information from, I'm sure you could find that out, but that's a really great question.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay.
Our next presentation comes from Isaiah Hasu from Camp Hill Middle School.
Isaiah, are you here? Okay, hold on a second. You should be able to. Can you talk? Hold on a second. Let me move you to panelists. Okay, you should be able to talk now.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Can
we
you hear?
can.
Okay.
Mhm.
All right. So before I'm a student at Camp Hill Middle School. My name's Isaiah Husu, and I'm in 8th grade. And before I start my project, I wanted to give thanks to my mentor, Dr. Christopher Box, for helping me with this experiment specifically, and also with my future endeavors. So next slide, please. So my project is focused, experiment specifically is focused on air quality and the relationship between relative humidity and particulate matters, or matter levels, sorry. And the next slide, please. So here's a little bit of background and motivation for why I chose this topic. So as the world's population has increased and our lives have become more and more industrialized, air pollution has become one of the most serious environmental and economic issues. More specifically, one type of air pollution is called air particulate matter. Particulate matter is the sum of all solid and liquid particles suspended in the air, many of which are hazardous. And particulate matter is split up into two different groups mainly, based on size. So there's PM2.5 and PM10. So indoor and outdoor air pollution has profound effects on human morbidity and mortality. In 2012, around 7 million people died as a result of air pollution, which was 1 in 8 of total global deaths, or about 12.5%. So some atmospheric variables that alter the concentration of particulate matter are relative humidity, temperature, and atmospheric pressure. But I tried to focus on relative humidity since atmospheric pressure should stay relatively the same, and temperature and relative humidity are inversely proportional. So it'd be redundant to look at both of them. So in a study, they found that with relative humidity increasing from less than 40% to more than 70%, the average sulfur oxidation ratio and nitrogen oxidation ratio increased from 0.27 and 0.11 to 0.40 and 0.19. This shows that higher relative humidity significantly promoted the formation of secondary sulfate and nitrate, which are types of particulate matter. So because of the urgency of the situation, on December 7th, 2020, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency announced a final action to retain the nation's current air quality standards for particulate matter, setting guidelines for what levels are considered safe. So next slide, please. And next I'm showing, here's the a slide on the economic burden of air pollution. So not only is air pollution harmful to humans and the environment, but it's also harmful to the economy. So as you can see on this graph, nearly 6.6% of China's total GDP was allocated to air pollution, which is a lot of money. So, and that has effects on the economy. And there's also other countries. You can see the percentages there. So next slide, please. And I just wanted to, there's a quote by John F. Kennedy he read to convince the public to support the Apollo program. I just wanted to read that because it relates to my thing. So next slide. So we choose to go to the moon in this decade and do other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard, and because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills, because that challenge is one that we are willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, sorry, and one which we intend to win. So it kind of shows that even though it'd be really difficult to help like the environment and to stop fossil fuels and transition to clean energy, I think it'll be worth it in the long run. And yeah, this shows, oh wait, this shows where my sensors were located, my network of sensors were located. So in the Northeast, there's 3 sensors there, some other mentees are Dr. Box also. In the next slide. And then this is Dr. Gregory Jenkins. He's also a mentor at EnvironMentors, and he is also doing studies on particulate matter in Africa specifically also. So for my experimentation and hypotheses, so during this experiment, air particulate matter in multiple areas, Camp Hill and State College specifically, were measured, and they were compared to EPA guidelines to determine whether they were safe. Then furthermore, atmospheric and meteorological factors such as relative humidity were analyzed. And these factors' behavior were analyzed and compared to particulate matter. So for my hypotheses, considering the suburban environment of Camp Hill and recent attempts to slow COVID spread, I thought it would be unlikely that Camp Hill's PM levels would be dangerous. And State College, although it's densely populated, I also predicted it would be safe there. And then finally, I hypothesized that there would be a positive correlation between relative humidity and PM levels. Slide. So these were some of the measurement tools that I used. So these were actually sent to me by Dr. Box. Next slide, please. And as you can see there, these are the images of the items. So I used the AeroQual portable handheld air quality monitor, the AeroQual particulate matter sensor head, the AeroQual temperature and relative humidity sensor, and the AeroQual carry case small, which was just the accessory to carry the items. Next slide. Yeah, this was an image of, I meant to have this later, but yeah, this is an image of me and my family, sorry. Next slide, please. So for my data analysis, these are 2 bar graphs showing the average PM 2.5 and average PM 10 levels in all the areas that I tested. And according to figure 1 and 2, which are these graphs, State College PM 2.5 and PM 10 levels were significantly higher than Camp Hill's in all locations. And this may suggest that Camp Hill's air quality is better than State College, though it cannot be generalized based on a single monitoring site. So surprisingly, I actually found that PM 10 levels only slightly exceeded PM 2.5 levels in all areas, even though they probably should be higher based on the EPA standard set. Next slide, please. And then, So for my time graphs, I showed the relative humidity PM 2.5 and PM 10 over time. And again, there wasn't much of a difference between PM 10 and PM 2.5, but more importantly, I found there was positive correlation between PM levels and relative humidity, supporting what I said in my research. However, both graphs had close to the same RH levels, as you can see, and this suggests that RH is not a primary determinant of PM, and cannot explain State College's abnormally high particulate matter levels. And then for my histograms, I made some histograms about the distribution of the PM levels in both State College and Camp Hill. So I found that the histogram of PM in State College represented a bimodal distribution, meaning that multiple ranges had high frequencies, and this suggests more variance, and that the PM levels kind of fluctuated a bit. And then, but in Camp Hill's histograms, you can see that it represented a decaying exponential distribution, meaning that the levels were mostly closer to zero, and the PM levels tended to be more stable. Next slide, please. And then here I have some mentees of Dr. Box that that contributed some data, not to my project specifically, but to the overall project. So this is Noah Pollock Davis. He's a mentee of Dr. Box, and he has some of that data there. And then next slide. And same thing here. This was another mentee of Dr. Box, so Jonathan Culpepper. I don't know both of them personally, but I know that they also both contributed. Next slide. And then finally, obviously, this is my mentor, Dr. Box. And he also recorded PM measurements, and I believe he's still doing that now. Next slide. So in conclusion, for my experiment, I found that my hypotheses were partially correct. And while it was found that Camp Hill's PM levels were safe, State College's PM levels were not. And I found that for some EPA guidelines, State College highly exceeded the safe ranges. And this suggests that indoor ventilation plays a large role in air quality, because State College participant was in an apartment building, and then 2, population density correlates with poor air quality because State College was a densely populated area, though these are just assumptions. And then second, a correlation was found between both RH and both PM 2.5 and PM 10. And in fact, PM 2.5 and PM 10 were nearly identical in all areas. And then finally, the distribution of air quality levels across time was very different in State College and Camp Hill. State colleges had a bimodal distribution suggesting more variance, while Camp Hill had a decaying exponential distribution suggesting less variance, and it was closer to zero. So for real world applications, the result from this experiment can be used to help pinpoint exactly which variables affect particulate matter and what role they play. Once that is achieved, there would be a host of possible applications, such as predicting particulate matter levels, using it to further environmental awareness or to help focus the effects of environmental remediation. Next slide. I think that was it, actually. But, oh yeah, sorry, I actually had a few more slides. So for future directions, I wanted to continue air quality measurements. So that means installing purple air sensors, which are another type of air quality sensors in my local school, which is where the school I go to, and quantify the contribution of PM air quality exposure via mixed binomial and multi-level modeling. And then I also wanted to build collaborations with socioeconomic economic experts, which will help in quantifying economic impacts due to poor air quality. Next slide, please. And then for my acknowledgements, I had the Penn State EnvironMentors team, my mom, and my school also.
Presentation was great, Isaiah.
Yes,
Do we have any questions for Isaiah? Here we go. The influence of ventilation was really important to identify. Do you know if the indoor cooking event spikes were with gas range or an electric range?
I'm not exactly sure, but I think they varied for the Menchees. But I'm not exactly sure, so I couldn't really say.
Okay. Another question. Are all the days of the week unsafe in State College, PA, due to the high levels of particulate matter?
Wait, sorry, could you say that again?
Are all the days of the week unsafe in State College, PA, due to the high levels of particulate matter?
So I actually did an average, so I'm not exactly sure like which days of the week specifically, because I didn't really focus on like which days, but I did do an average. But yeah, I couldn't really say because I did the average there.
Okay. Very, very cool. All right. Next we have Jonathan Mwenje from State College Area High School.
Hello.
Hello, Jonathan, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Can you speak a little louder? That would be helpful. Thank
All
you.
right. Can you hear me
Perfect.
now? Is that
Yes,
better?
yes,
All
that
right.
works.
Hi, my name is Jonathan Moinke, and I will be presenting on hurricane observations and their aftermath, specifically looking at fatalities and costs associated with them. I worked with my undergraduate mentor, Alicia Wellington, and PSU faculty mentors, Jerry and XC. Next slide, please. The objective of our project was to analyze how the social infrastructure of a state or country may influence the fatalities and costs associated with a hurricane. We researched the following hurricanes: Hurricane Sandy, Harvey, Maria, and Florence, which were among the most costliest hurricanes in U.S. history. We used data from the National Hurricane Center and the U.S. Census Bureau. Next slide. The first hurricane we looked at was Hurricane Sandy. As shown in the figure with the synoptic timeline, Sandy started off as a tropical wave off the west coast of Africa and took a path through the Caribbean and geared towards the northeast US as a Category 3 storm. Sandy left catastrophic damage and flooding, most notably in New Jersey. Next slide. Next, we have Hurricane Harvey, which was a Category 4 storm, which took a more curved path originating from the coast of West Africa and progressed towards South America and later North America. Harvey left the most destruction behind in Texas, where it left many homeless and flooding was massive. Next slide, please. Maria was a Category 5 storm. Like the others, it began off the coast of West Africa, but mainly took a course over the Atlantic Ocean. Maria officially made landfall over Puerto Rico as a high-end Category 4 storm. Maria caused massive destruction and flooding. It took 11 months to restore electricity in Puerto Rico. Next slide, please. Our last hurricane was Florence, a long-lived Category 4 storm that took an elongated path across the Atlantic Ocean. Florence made landfall in North Carolina as a Category 1 storm. As the hurricane strengthened, it left extensive flooding and water damage along the East Coast. Next slide, please. Tying everything together, we looked at some important components that account for the intensification of a hurricane. A very low pressure center and high winds encourage a stronger hurricane. Here we see Maria has the lowest pressure and the highest wind speed, which correlates to its Category 5 classification. However, Harvey had the highest observed rainfall, which is also important to note. Next slide, please. To get a full idea of the aftermath, we graphed the death toll and the cost associated with each hurricane. As expected, there was a general positive correlation when comparing the death toll and cost. Especially the most intense hurricane, Maria, the black data point, had both the highest cost and highest death toll, which made sense. However, we saw the least intense storm, which was Sandy, the blue data point, had a higher death toll and higher costs compared to the more intense Category 4 storms, which were Florence and Harvey. This led us to consider that the aftermath of a hurricane is not always caused by their intensity, but possibly another factor. Next slide, please. Our big question was, what role does social infrastructure play of a state or country in the aftermath of a storm, specifically looking at the cost and fatalities? Next slide, please. We first compared the cost of a storm to the mean income per household. We decided to compare these two parameters to explore whether the economic status of a state or country had an impact on how well they were able to prepare for a storm, and in return causing more financial burdens after a storm. I do want to note that the cost is represented in billions on this graph. Here we didn't see a clear correlation between the cost and mean income. For Puerto Rico, we did see a low mean income of about $20,000 and a massive cost of $91.6 billion. A low income and massive costs were what we expected. However, when looking at Sandy in New Jersey, this state had the highest mean income, about $85,000, but still there was a higher hurricane cost associated with Sandy compared to both Florence and Harvey. Next slide, please. Next, we compared the cost with the amount of individuals living below the poverty line. The idea behind comparing these two were similar to the previous comparison, where you expected more individuals living under the poverty line and a higher cost, again tying this to how well a state was financially prepared before a storm and related to its aftermath. Once again, you do not observe a clear correlation between these two parameters. Here we see New Jersey had the least amount of individuals living below the poverty line, just shy of 800,000 individuals, but had an $86.7 billion cost associated with Sandy, compared to North Carolina that had 1.3 million living under the poverty line, but only a $24.2 billion cost associated with Hurricane Florence. Next slide, please. Lastly, we compared the number of hospitals to the number of fatalities. We expected the number of hospitals may influence how many fatalities were observed because of the limited access to a hospital can make it more difficult to provide medical assistance safely and efficiently. For Maria, we observed what we expected. Puerto Rico had 52 hospitals and over 800 fatalities, which was substantially higher than the other storms. However, when looking at Texas, there were 361 hospitals, which was the highest among the studied areas, and there was still 80 fatalities associated with Hurricane Harvey, which was 60 more than compared to Florence in North Carolina. Next slide, please. In the end, we concluded there is no definite correlation, but we are confident that the social infrastructure of a state can influence the number of fatalities and costs associated with hurricanes, among other factors. In terms of research, we are confident that emergency preparedness and disaster response can serve as avenues to explain the fatalities and costs associated with the aftermath of hurricanes. Another point of exploration could adding some aspect of public health with weather forecasting aid in avoiding destruction. Once again, I'd like to thank my undergraduate mentor, Alicia Wellington, and faculty mentors, Jerry and Exie, along with the EnvironMentors program for this opportunity. And thank you for everyone attending today.
Thank you, Jonathan. Questions for Jonathan? here we go. Oops. Did you examine the relationship between people living in poverty and the number of fatalities? Does wind or flooding cause more death?
When it comes to wind or flooding causing more death, the data didn't really show the specific causes of the deaths, but there is direct storm damage, and then the aftermath, which is more of the flooding. But I can look in that for you. I can look more in depth for you.
Okay. And the first part of the question, did you examine the relationship between people living in poverty and the number of fatalities?
No, we had not looked at that, but that could be a further study that we could do in the future.
Okay, thank you so much, Jonathan.
Thank you.
Next, we have Josefa Elidas from State High.
No, we have Garrick saying next.
Oh,
yes.
sorry.
Sorry about that. Garrick, are you here?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. You are next.
All right, sounds good. Hello, everyone. My name is Garrick Zhang. I'm a senior here at State High. And the project that I have for today is called Photovoltaic Energy Conversion System. And I was advised by Dr. Kazai along with the help of my undergraduate mentor, Tabeen Asif. Next slide, please. So in this presentation, I have an outline. So I'm going to first introduce to you what solar is, or photovoltaics. Then I will talk about direct current to alternating current conversion. Then I will model to you direct current to an alternating current converter. Then I will talk about a maximum power point tracking method. Then I will talk about my simulation results, then my conclusions, and lastly, my citations and acknowledgements. Next slide, please. So here we see a picture of renewable solar. On top of the house, we can see a solar PV system, and the sun's rays will shine on the system, and it will go to the hybrid inverter, the DC to AC, and that will power your home, and it will also store in a battery for at night. Then we see a net meter, which tells you your statistics for your amperage and your volts. And lastly, it will travel to the utility grid. Next slide, please. So what exactly is photovoltaic power? Well, quite simply, photovoltaic means light to electricity. Solar panels are the most common photovoltaic energy sources. PV arrays generate electricity through semiconductors. Photons strike and ionize semiconductor material on the solar panel, which causes outer electrons to break free of their atomic bonds. Electrons in these materials can be freed and made to travel through circuits that power electronics. These semiconductors are engineered to force electrons in one direction, creating a flow of electrical current. Next slide, please. And so here, I'm going to talk about how inverters work. And so in the middle, we can see the DC current will travel to an inverter, and out will come a sinusoidal wave, which we call alternating current. And on the right side, you can see a practical picture of what an inverter would really look like in the real world. Next slide, please. And how or why does conversion happen? Well, simply an inverter will convert DC to AC. The power from the solar panel is DC, which is direct current, but our houses use alternating current, which is why we need to convert. And the way they do that is that inverters will rapidly switch the direction of electrical current and this will produce the alternating current that we see. Next slide, please. On this page, I have what a diagram of the inverter would look like. So on the left side, we can see that the solar panel is connected to two outlets, VDC over 2. And you can see on the inside, there are 3 switches, and connected to those switches are VA, VB, and VC. And this is why this is called a 3-phase inverter, because it produces 3 sine alternating currents at the end. And these switches will switch once every 1/5000th of a second, so very quickly. And as you can see, S1, S3, and S5, S3 will switch on 1/15,000th seconds after S1, which will produce the 120 degrees phase shift in the output. And similarly, S5 will switch on 1/15,000th after S3. Next slide, please. And so now I'm going to talk about what maximum power point tracking is. Maximum power point tracking is a technique used to optimize power extraction under all conditions. The first method I'm going to talk about is called perturb and observe. This is a method in which the voltage is slightly adjusted in order to increase power. It then stops when power no longer increases. This is the most common method. However, it can result in power oscillations. So there's another method that you can use, and it's called incremental conductance. The controller measures incremental changes in photovoltaic array current and voltage to predict the effect of a voltage change. This is more accurate and works better in fast changing atmospheric conditions. Next slide, please. And solar panels operate most efficiently when parameters are favorable. Those being temperature, voltage, amperage, and irradiance, which is a fancy way of saying the sun. Next slide, please. And so here I have 2 graphs showing maximum power point tracking across different temperatures. So at the top, the controller will find the most optimal point where voltage and current will produce the most power. And if you know anything about electrical physics, you know that current times voltage gives you the most power, gives you power. And so you would obtain the most power when voltage and current are both optimized. And as you can see, at every single temperature, the controller will find the point where voltage and current will make the most power. So at the bottom, you can see at every temperature, power is at a maximum. Next slide, please. And so then you can see here, when measured, the voltage and the amperage are both held steady at the most optimal point across all different temperatures. Next slide, please. This is my simulation map. So this is what I used to run my simulations. This was done using MATLAB. And so there are lots of different components to this simulation map, and it can be very confusing, but I am going to talk you through the most important parts of the simulation map relevant to my study. So on the left side, we can see temperature and irradiance are being inputted into a solar panel. And this solar panel is connected to a 3-level IGBT bridge, and that is our inverter. The current will then travel to what is called an RLC filter. Once it's been filtered, then it will go towards a transformer. And at the very top, we have the maximum power point tracking controller. Next slide, please. Here I have a graphical representation of the electrical current after inversion, filtration, and transformation. So at the top, you can see that there are 3 more or less sine waves, and that is from the three-phase inverter. But then after we filter and transform it, we can see that the current is decreased, the voltage is increased, and we also produce a perfect sine wave, which is what we want to see in our alternating current. Next slide, please. And so in conclusion, photovoltaics is an effective way to harness the sun's energy. We learned about how direct current is converted to alternating current. And photovoltaic arrays have many different types of components to help that happen. We simulated real life solar panels and how they work. And through the research of more solar panels, we can increase our knowledge of the limits and inner workings of them and can improve on them and build on our path to green energy. Next slide, please. Please take a look at my citations, and I want to give a special thanks to my undergrad assistant, Tabina Seif, and my mentor, Dr. Javad Kazai, as well as the EnvironMentors program for allowing me an amazing opportunity to do research and have fun. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Garrett. Questions? Yes, we have one already. What is the efficiency of the DC to AC converter?
The efficiency as in, like, is there power lost between? Is that what you mean?
I would assume that that's
okay.
Yes.
So when we didn't measure the power output of the DC current, typically I'd say that's not really what we're focusing on, because we want to figure out how much power we're producing that is actually usable to us. So because of that, we didn't measure any of the DC current coming out. However, I would say that it's pretty efficient when it transforms DC to AC. If we wanted to be even more efficient, I think maybe we could increase the frequency at which the switches switch inside of the three-phase inverter. But right now, I would say it's pretty efficient.
Okay. Another great question. The idea of tuning a solar panel to maximize the power based on temperature and irradiance is incredible. Is that approach already in commercial use?
Yes, that is something that commercial users are already doing. The simulation that we use uses all of the solar panels that are already on the market, and it's quite incredible actually in the simulation how diverse the amount of commercial solar panels that they can accurately simulate. And so these controllers on that we have in the simulation actually does the job of simulating what a real controller would do in the real world. And those controllers will in real time control for how much sun is coming in or how cold or hot it is. And it is very incredible. And to answer your question, yes, it is already being put into commercial use.
Great, thank you so much. Our next presentation comes from Chidere Oputa from State College High.
Good afternoon. My name is Chidere Oputa, and I'm a senior at State College Area High School. In collaboration with Dr. Richard Chochi and Ayushi Patel, I focus my research on assistive devices for Huntington's disease. I chose this research topic because as a future biomedical engineering student, I became interested in Dr. Chochi's research regarding Huntington's disease, specifically the technology put in place to assist patients, addressing their needs and providing comfort. Next slide. In order to better comprehend the need for assistive devices, one must understand what Huntington's is. Huntington's disease is a genetic disorder that deteriorates one's physical and mental abilities, causing difficulty in day-to-day activities. Why is that? Well, it comes to a defect on one of our chromosomes, as seen on the bottom chromosome towards the right hand of the screen. That codes for a protein known as Huntington.
Chidere, can you hear? Can you talk?
motor learning, executive functions, behavior.
Hi, children, you caught it in and out, just so you know.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay.
Mhm.
What part did you hear up to? Sorry.
If you can just restart your whole slide, that would be great.
Okay. So in order to understand the need for assistive devices, you must comprehend what Huntington's is. Huntington's disease is a genetic disorder that deteriorates one's physical and mental abilities, causing difficulty in day-to-day activities. That's because it comes down to a defect in one of our chromosomes that codes for a protein known as Huntington. The defective production of Huntington leads to the progressive breakdown of nerve cells. Specifically, the deterioration occurs in the part of the brain known as the basal ganglia, which is responsible for motor control as well as motor learning, executive functions.
Children, are you here?
Yes, can you guys hear me now?
It keeps cutting in and out a little bit.
I'm
Yeah, we
sorry.
can hear you now. No worries. No worries at all. Just move on. Yeah.
Okay, next slide. Thank you.
Mhm.
Although Can you guys hear me?
We can hear you now.
Okay. Although there is no cure, there are treatment options available to allow a greater quality of life, but the ultimate goal is to maintain optimal independence for patients. So that led me to my question. What technology is needed to allow patients with Huntington's to age in place? Next slide. Aging in place refers to patients remaining within their place of residence without a transition to assisted living, such as retirement communities or nursing homes, even as their abilities decline. Therefore, a home is needed to meet them at every stage of the condition. I specifically looked at Masonic Village as pictured in the left in Elizabethtown, Pennsylvania, where they offer smart homes. A smart home is filled with a variety of technology to assist in daily tasks such as adjusting thermostats, lights, and other devices through internet connection. These cottages are equipped with technology such as mobile charging stations, iPads, touchless faucets, and other types of assistive devices to cater to patients' needs and capabilities. I specifically focused on 3 features in the home: the refrigerator, the faucet, and the iPad to access their function and their usage. Next slide, please.
Okay, perfect.
Okay. Beginning with the smart refrigerator, it serves a variety of purposes such as tracking expiration dates of items, recognizing and managing inventory, and even tracking usage. This is achieved through a barcode or RFID system, radio frequency identification system. It works by automatic detection, therefore requiring each item to have a barcode or an RFID tag. To further explain, an RFID tag or a barcode triggers the readers. The tag then transmits digital data, sending out a content list to other devices through mediums such as Wi-Fi. It's important to note that an RFID system and a barcode system work differently, but serve similar functions. A barcode system requires a line of sight to scan a barcode, similar to as when you're at Huntington's patients because they struggle with memorization. Therefore, this creates a mode of organization for patients, which is pivotal as their memory declines. Furthermore, smart refrigerators often give auditory signals and 2015 data from the U.S. Energy Information Administration for Can you guys still hear me?
We can hear you now, Chidere.
Okay. And information from the U.S. Energy Information Administration for a single-family attached household in the Northeast, which on average uses about 7,202 kilowatt hours annually of energy. Of that energy usage, refrigerators typically consume about 7%, so they use about 504.14 kilowatts annually, whereas in comparison, an energy-efficient fridge can save about 10% in energy consumption. So in the first year, a smart fridge will use about 453.726 kilowatts. In a matter of 10 years, they would have saved a year worth of energy consumption of a regular fridge. Next slide. Onto the touchless faucet, it functions through the use of infrared light and sensors. These sensors contain an infrared light seated directly next to an infrared detector. Therefore, whenever your hands get into a few inches within the infrared light, the light bounces off your skin into the sensor, signaling the faucet to turn on. The touchless aspect of the faucet aids patients as their fine motor skills decline, making it difficult to turn handles on traditional faucets. Furthermore, the automatic aspect in it aids with memorization because no longer do patients have to remember to turn off the faucet. While this feature serves the patient, it also aids in water conservation. On average, a faucet uses 1 to 3 gallons of water per minute, equating to approximately 525,600 to 1,576,800 gallons annually. However, automatic faucets help conserve about 3 to 5% of water used in the average household. So on the lower end, it can use from 499,302 to 509,832 gallons annually, to the upper end of 1,497,906 to 1,529,496 gallons annually. Next slide. Lastly, onto the iPad. An iPad is a touchscreen tablet typically used for a variety of activities, such as browsing the web, assessing apps, storing and taking photos, just to name a few of the functionalities. However, in this instance, the iPad is used as a centralized hub to adjust the lights, check weather, access the directory for services, and other features, making it readily available to patients. Going back to the light control feature, this is set up through Bluetooth. Bluetooth works through radio waves rather than traditional waves and cables, allowing lights and the iPads to pair up and communicate. The iPad proves to be a huge asset for Huntington's patients on multiple levels. First, it provides a centralized hub for organizational purposes. Additionally, the lights feature is nice in the aspect of the device because rather than having to use a traditional light with the on and off switch, which poses to be a hard task to do with their decreased motor function, you can just swipe up and down with the iPad, which is nice. However, in order for the iPad to be used, it must be charged. A recent study done by the EPRI, the Electric Power Research Institute, said that an iPad would consume 11.9 kilowatt hours annually based on being charged every other day, which leads to about 119 kilowatt hours in a year. Next slide. To summarize, not only do these assistive devices function to improve the overall quality of life of patients and allow them to age in place and give them an increased source of independence, but in some cases, these devices tend to have a positive attributes in terms of water and electricity consumption. Next slide. I'd first like to thank Dr. Chochi and Ayushi for working with me and being flexible through these unprecedented times. I'd also like to thank Ms. Lorraine and Ms. Muriel for enabling me to be a part of such a unique opportunity and keeping us all connected throughout the year. I'd also like to thank my peers, especially Josepha L. Doss, for being a source of support during this process. And finally, the EnvironMentors program for affording me so many opportunities and skill sets and experiences that I'll forever be grateful for. Thank you.
Great job, Chidere. Do we have questions? All right. So I guess we'll move on. Again, great job. Our last presentation today comes from Josefa Eladas from State College High.
Good afternoon. My name is Josefa Eladas, and I worked with Dr. Fuentes, Stephanie Lin, and Priscilla Salinas. Because the COVID-19 pandemic has had such an impact on all of our lives for over a year, I was interested in how particulate matter worked in the body. For our project this year, we studied the effect ozone and PM 2.5 has on human health. Next slide. I decided to be a part of this project to expand my understanding of how ozone and PM 2.5 affect the lungs and to learn how tropospheric ozone can affect different populations. I did this by reading papers about how ozone and PM 2.5 affect the heart and lungs and by analyzing ozone data. We can help limit the negative impacts of ozone by reducing our emissions of pollutants. Next slide. The goals I had for this project were to understand how ozone and PM 2.5 are formed, to demonstrate how ozone levels vary in rural and urban Pennsylvania, and to know if existing levels of ozone detrimentally affect human health, and how that destruction specifically occurs within the lungs. In the next slide, I will provide some background. Gases like ozone and particulate matters like PM 2.5 are known as air pollutants. However, there are some differences between ozone and PM 2.5. Ozone occurs both in the stratosphere, which we know as the ozone layer, and in the atmosphere, where it's produced through chemical reactions. Today, I will focus on ozone in the atmosphere and tropospheric ozone. Ozone is a gaseous substance that sometimes appears as smog. It can come from cars, power plants, etc. PM2.5 are tiny particles in the air, and their ability to cause disease is dependent on their size, origin, solubility, composition, and its ability to create reactive oxygen species. It can be found in areas of human activities, which can be in your home or at your workplace. This is important because of the way these air pollutants negatively affect your health. For example, ozone causes inflammation in the lungs because it breaks and reforms chemical bonds in the alveoli when inhaled. The gas also breaks the membranes in the lungs' protective lining, which impacts your protection from infection. This causes muscles to contract and airways to narrow, leading to shortness of breath and difficulty breathing. Overall, ozone negatively affects every organ in your body and puts you at a greater risk for major diseases like lung and heart disease. PM 2.5 can penetrate the lung severely with oxidative stress and cell apoptosis. It causes irritation and corrodes the lung wall when inhaled. Like ozone, it can impair lung function and is linked with higher cardiovascular mortality. Next slide. Now I will demonstrate how ozone and PM 2.5 are formed. Next slide. Sunlight breaks nitrogen dioxide, which is emitted from vehicles and any sources that burn fossil fuels, down into nitric oxide and oxygen atoms. The J represents how quickly the sun breaks down the nitrogen oxide. Then the atomic and molecular oxygen combine to form ozone. The rate coefficient K determines how fast the chemical reaction occurs. Next slide. This is another way to demonstrate ozone formation. Ozone is formed when volatile organic compounds or pollutants emitted by chemical plants, cars, etc., chemically react with nitric oxide in the presence of sunlight. When volatile organic compounds are in the air masses, these gases serve as catalysts to the formation of ozone. Therefore, ozone formation will occur at a faster rate. Next slide. PM 2.5 comes from multiple sources and can be formed in many ways. It is not a single pollutant, but rather is a mixture of many chemical species. It is a complex mixture of solids and aerosols, composed of small droplets of liquid, dry solid fragments, and solid cores with liquid coatings. PM 2.5 can be formed through coagulation, where tiny particles will collide and grow, and through condensation, where gases condense onto a small solid particle to form a liquid droplet. Next slide. It can also be formed through cloud processes, where gases dissolve in a water droplet and chemically react. When the water evaporates, the particle will be left. Lastly, through chemical reaction, where gases react to form the particles. In this case, nitric oxide and nitrogen dioxide combine with hydroxyl radicals to form nitric acid. Ammonia is added from the air to nitric acid to create the particle of ammonium nitrate. Next slide. Now we are moving on to our analysis of ozone levels, where we took data, created figures, and plotted graphs. Next slide. This map illustrates the locations of ozone monitoring sites in Pennsylvania. The red squares represent the rural sites and the blue circles represent the urban sites. I selected one urban site in Cambria County and one rural site in York County to demonstrate how ozone levels differ in rural and urban Pennsylvania. Next slide. This figure shows ozone levels throughout the day in an urban area. The levels vary from 30 to 70 parts per billion in volume in the morning and from 70 to 110 in the afternoon to early evening. It shows that the ozone is at its highest from noon to 8 p.m. The blue line represents the National Ambient Air Quality Standard that the Environmental Protection Agency has set. It represents the maximum level at which ozone is considered safe for humans, so anything above that is detrimental to our health. Next slide. These figures illustrate the relative frequency of ozone levels throughout 1990 and 2018 in both an urban area, shown on the left, and a rural area, which is on the right. As you can see, after 10 years, the higher levels of ozone are occurring less frequently. In the figures on the top, you can see that the higher levels of ozone occur more frequently than in 2018. Ozone can be degraded by nitrogen oxide, and this occurs more often in cities. Nitrogen oxide is found more in urban cities, and during the nighttime, ozone levels are closer to zero, bringing the average in urban areas down. Because there is less nitrogen oxide in rural areas, ozone levels stay relatively the same. Next slide. These figures show the highest ozone averages for the past 30 years, as well as a red horizontal line going through the graphs, once again representing the EPA recommendation. As you can see, the levels now are much lower than they were in the 1980s and may even be reaching a plateau, demonstrating that we have cleaned up the air a bit and are making some progress. However, our averages in the last 5 years surpass the recommended levels, meaning we are still at a risk for damage to our lungs and the other earlier mentioned effects. Next slide. Ozone is gaseous, and PM 2.5 is small enough to be inhaled. When inhaled, they travel to the lungs where they impair lung function. Ozone and PM 2.5 also affect other parts of the body. They cause irritation and itchiness in the eyes and nose, and irritate the respiratory tract when traveling to the lungs. Over time, the heart is also affected because of the shortness of breath caused by the muscle contraction in the lungs. The heart is forced to pump blood harder because of the lack of oxygen and becomes overworked and enlarged over time. Some of the populations that are most at risk are people that have pre-existing heart and lung conditions or weakened immune systems. Also, elderly, children, pregnant people, and people who spend a lot of time outdoors. You can stay protected by checking the air quality index in your area to see if it is safe to go outside. Avoid congested or highly polluted areas. Wear a mask to prevent the inhalation of particles. Keep windows and doors closed when inside, and avoid going outside on very sunny days because the production of ozone is aided by the sun. Next slide. When ozone reaches the lungs, holes are formed in the protective lining. It can cause the muscles in the airway to constrict, trapping air in the alveoli. This causes wheezing and shortness of breath, which leads to the development of emphysema, a disorder of the alveoli. The transfer of oxygen and carbon dioxide take place in the walls of the alveoli, and when someone develops emphysema, the air sacs are damaged, and over time the lining weakens and causes the sacs to rupture, creating larger air spaces instead of many small ones. We can see this in the pictures on the bottom. This affects your lungs' ability to ward off infection and can lead to the development of more detrimental diseases. Next slide. Based on the studies I completed, I can provide the following summary and conclusions. Ozone and PM 2.5 both negatively affect respiratory and heart health. However, due to higher ozone levels often being in urban areas, those populations are at higher risk for lung and heart disease. Also, the air is much cleaner than it was 20 to 30 years ago, but ozone levels are still too high to be considered safe. We should be concerned because everybody is exposed to these pollutants and are therefore at risk for lung and heart disease. Next slide. I would like to thank Ms. Gomero for checking in on all the mentees and keeping us all connected, especially during the pandemic. Ms. Taylor for informing me about the EnvironMentors program and helping to keep me motivated. Dr. Jenkins for directing EnvironMentors. Lastly, I would like to especially thank Dr. Fuentes, Stephanie Lynn, and Priscilla Salinas for mentoring me and teaching me this year. Next slide. Here are my references. Thank you.
Excellent presentation, Josefa. Do we have questions? We have one coming in. You mentioned the recommendation to stay inside when ozone levels are high. Earlier, we learned that PM 2.5 can be higher indoors than outdoors. Is this also true for ozone? How can we reconcile this trade-off?
I found that ozone levels would be higher outside than inside because the production of ozone needs the sun. The chemical reaction needs to be photolyzed for ozone to be created, and that would happen outside.
Okay.
I think we have one more question or?
Are locations in PA where both ozone and PM 2.5 are high? Are there locations?
Are you asking if there are locations where the levels are higher than others?
Yes.
Or, oh, okay. Well, yes, there are. I demonstrated that in the beginning of the presentation with the slide that had the rural versus urban sites. Depending on the levels of pollution and the congestion in certain areas, the production of ozone and PM 2.5 will occur more. And so there'll be higher levels in those locations.
Okay. Another question. Were catalytic converters used in either county?
I'm not too sure about that.
And continue with that question, at either of the sites were measurements, at either of the sites that the measurements were made. So also related to that question. So you're not. Okay. Well, if we have no other questions, that concludes our presentation portion of the program.
Okay. We have a couple more minutes for any questions that anybody will have for any of the students. A great job overall, students. Good job. Good job, everyone. But we have 2 to 3 minutes for more questions. I believe we see one more presentation. Okay. All right, no more questions. We're going to move on right into acknowledgement. Hold on, let me turn on my video real quick. All right, so thank you guys for joining us this this morning. It's now afternoon for to witness our students to presenting their project that they worked very hard on this year, especially given the circumstances with the pandemic and having to do everything virtual while at the same time they had to attend to school and homework and everything, life in general. But thank you guys for joining us. I would like to first acknowledge our high school students participating for this year, each and every one of you that signed up, that came to the meeting, the virtuals, even though you were tired, virtually exhausted from joining everything Zoom and activity Zoom. Thank you guys very much for your dedication to Penn State EnvironMentors this year. We know it was not easy for you guys, so we truly and very much so appreciate your participation within the program this year. Great job on the presentation this morning. You did great. You did excellent job. Thank you guys also for committing to your research team, for committing to making sure that you present, you wrap up your project and you present today. So shout out to all of our high school students participants. Next, we have our undergrad mentors. You guys are the other parts of our research team that we are very grateful for. Mary, Tabin, Rihanna, Amna, Catherine, Ayushi, Rika, Jolpa, Nikolai, Priscilla, Rasuka, Evelyn, Monica, Alison, Brittany. We thank all of you guys for dedicating this, for participating within the program, and for dedicating the time and effort that you put into meeting with your mentees on a weekly basis from the beginning of the academic year until now, and for making sure that you're helping them, you're assisting them along the way to complete the project. We appreciate you. Shout out once again to all the seniors, Nikolai, Brittany, and Evelyn, that are graduating today, and they couldn't be with us today, but shout out to you guys. Best of luck with your future, with grad school, with work, your future endeavors, and your next plans. Shout out to our undergraduate mentors. Next, we have our faculty mentors. We wouldn't be able to have this program without you. Thank you guys, thank you very much for the dedication, the effort, your resources, your time that you put into meeting with both the undergrad and the high school students. Thank you for seeing them through this academic year. We know it wasn't easy on top of all the responsibilities that you guys have as faculty. We see you, value you, and thank you for your effort, Dr. Box, Dr. Brennan, Dr. Caputo, Dr. COC, Dr. Fuentes, Dr. Furman, Halima, Dr. Jenkins, Dr. Kazai, Stephanie Lynn, Dr. Miles, Dr. Montero, Dr. Robinson, Dr. Saad, Dr. Todd, Dr. Nicole Webster. We appreciate all of you guys. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We want to acknowledge you this day because this won't have happened without you. Thank you once again for your effort, your dedication, your time, and the resources that you invested in the student this year. The results were shown this today, and they were very great. Thank you very much. Faculty mentors, this is you guys are assisting in transforming our global future, especially in the field of STEM. We appreciate you once again, your dedication to the Penn State EnvironMentors program, and we look forward to having you guys as part of the program once again this academic year. I'm gonna leave the floor to Dr. Box for closing remarks. Dr. Box, you have the floor.
Thank you, Muriel. I'm fortunate, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm fortunate to have the easiest part, which is okay. It's a little humor. But I really enjoyed all of these presentations. I mean, they were amazing, you know, from the realm of climate, public health, engineering, space engineering. And this, you know, is the essence of community. Despite, you know, the forces that be this last year and a half, we all, you know, we're all sticking together and doing what we're supposed to, right? You know, stick together and do great work. So I think we will all, you know, kind of resonate the amazing work that you all have done as a community. And I wanted to kind of, you know, leave with I'm actually into poetry, and I loved a lot of the poetry and some of the quotes that Martin Luther King wrote while he was at Morehouse. And I wanted to leave you all with one of my favorite quotes of him, and kind of ties into the you know, the essence of the love you all have for STEM and science. So I'll leave you all with this quote. I have decided to stick with love, period, because hate is too great a burden to bear. So, you know, infusing the essence of what we do in PSU EnvironMentors at Penn State and throughout the PA region, you all are open, you know, remain steadfast, remain open to science, remain open to, you know, just doing great work that's exothermic for you all. And in doing that, your future will really have no bounds. So with that said, you know, thank you everyone. And it was a beautiful experience to see these great talks. And then again, remain steadfast. And I hope everyone enjoys their summer, and you know, and can continue the gravy train of this science that we call STEM, because without the community, it's a lot harder to do it. So again, thank you and have a blessed weekend. With that said, Godspeed.
Thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you very much to the students. Great presentations, great presentations. Thank you guys. Thank you very much.